So, the other day, and when I say the other day I mean a few weeks ago now, I received an email from JetCat Games, this being the same JetCat Games who makes the game Heliborne, that you can see now. And basically, the email said, "Hey, Heliborne is a game, we make said game, here's it for free, tell us what you think." And I went, "Oh, that's awfully nice of you. Alright, I will have a look." And after having a quick look at the game, I thought, hey, I might as well make a video on it, because, well, they were nice enough to give it to me for free, so I'll be nice enough to make a review for them. That being said, though, I'm not being sponsored to make this video at all, and in fact I will not be gentle when it comes to my review of this game, and I will say everything the way it is. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So, upon starting the game, I was immediately met with this screen that asked me to either connect or play offline, and no matter what I did, I couldn't connect or play offline. Yes, it would appear that the game had sort of crashed before even starting up, which, as far as first impressions go, I have to admit that I have seen better. But after a few attempts, I did eventually get the game working, and got to the main menu, where I immediately thought the first place to go would be the solo campaigns, of which there are only two, these being for either the Americans or the Russians in slightly different time periods, the Americans being all to do with the Vietnam War, and the Russians being to do with the Afghanistan conflicts. But after choosing my campaign of choice, I immediately went on to a loading screen that took a very long time, and well, even though it did take a long time, I really should have counted my blessings, as half the time, campaigns will outright just not load on this game and will stick on their loading screens indefinitely. So yeah, more loading problems with this game, which already, as said before, was greatly improving my first impressions of the game. Which brings us to the actual game itself. And well, Heliborne is a historical focus helicopter game, whereby you get an objective, a small supply of helicopters you may choose between to complete said objective, all before time runs out, and well, that's about it really. So really the bread and butter of games like this, but hey, bread and butter is nice and can work well, although a bit plain. And I think that for the most part, this game does seem to make its missions work pretty well, despite their quite repetitive and strenuous missions. I mean, out of the dozen or so missions you can actually do on the campaign, there's basically only 3 different types of mission, these being A, protect ground forces as they move from point A to point B, B, destroy all ground forces in a given area, or C, pick up ground forces from point A and move them to point B. So for the most part you play the role of a supporting aircraft, although I use the word supporting very lightly, as what you really should be called is the aircraft who has to actually do all of the work. As despite the fact that most missions on this game revolve around supporting ground forces, they don't actually do anything, and in fact most of the time they just spend standing around either doing nothing or firing their machine guns wildly in the air in the sort of direction of the enemy. And honestly, this wouldn't be so much of an issue if it wasn't completely essential to completing missions that you have to kill every single enemy force within an area, otherwise the mission is an instant failure. Which means that if you spend your entire game killing hundreds and hundreds of enemies, but then you missed one of them who's hiding behind a rock somewhere with a particularly pointy stick,
You get nothing! You lose!
And what makes this even worse is the fact that it's quite hard to spot enemy positions, as they don't get markers over them until you're very close to them, at which point they're often within range of you, and then you get filled full of holes. And since your forces on the ground, once again, can't actually be bothered to do anything, they don't exactly mark them out for you either, despite the fact they're clearly such a big issue that your entire massive armoured spearheads can't progress, because there's still one guy left who's throwing rocks at them from behind a boulder or whatever. Which means that a lot of the time you have to resort to flying around and spotting enemies in certain locations, destroying everything in that area, being 110% sure everything is dead and there's still not some guy hiding in the bushes somewhere who can stop your entire force, and then move over to the next area, and the next, and the next, in a form of systematic destruction. Or at least that's what I would do if the enemies didn't have a nasty tendency of constantly keep respawning. Yes, I'm serious, there are a lot of missions in this game that I've killed everyone in an area thinking, okay, they're all dead, I can forget about them now, I've just got to work on trying to find the others, and then a few moments later I come back to that area and it's full of enemies again. And in fact, there was even one instance where I literally watched them spawn in front of me only seconds after me just clearing out that area.
Serious?
Like, seriously, game, if you want to make it so I have to kill every single enemy in an area, then that's one thing. But making me have to kill every single enemy in an area, and then sometimes make some of them respawn without telling you, is a completely different thing, and I really was not a big fan of. As for the actual objective zones themselves, which are the places of which you have to reach to then complete whatever objective is inside them, they are also really quite annoying, as not only are they pretty far away from when you start, which is quite annoying and tedious, but at the very least there are enemies that shoot at you and that as you try to make your way there, so at least there's something to do. But the main issue with this, though, is the fact that upon arriving at these objectives, you will find yourself going off the edge of the map a lot, as almost all of the objectives are based on the very edge of the map, meaning that whilst you're strafing enemy forces and what have you, it's very common to just fly off the edge of the map, which wouldn't be a massive issue in any other game, but in this one, if you are outside of the map for any longer than 2 nanoseconds, then the game will instantly blow you up and you have to fly all the way back from your base again. But say you're playing a level where you have to pick up some forces, and they're currently standing about 3 centimeters from the edge of the map, whereby should you cross you will instantly explode, and you actually manage to land next to them after dealing with all the enemies, and then all the enemies' reinforcements that just appear out of nowhere, then even that is quite annoying, because quite simply the AI on the ground just doesn't cease to amaze me with how stupid they are, as when you do actually finally get around to landing and saving the forces on the ground, they will only get into your helicopter if they're within a certain radius of your helicopter. So if you land in the middle of them all, and then you tell them all to get in, every one of them will get in except for one guy that's standing a little bit too far away, at which point you have to then fly up again, move over to where they are, land again, tell them to get in, then you realise there's also another guy on the other side who you need to get in as well, because you have to collect pretty much everyone, so then you have to go up again, then you have to move over to them, and then you land, and then they get in, and then there's probably like 1,000 more that are just scattered around the area who really couldn't be asked to walk more than 5 meters. And that may sound like nitpicking, but do keep in mind that all of these missions are timed, and even when you've got them inside the helicopter with you and you're flying back to base, if your time then runs out, you lose. and you lose all the forces, they get overwhelmed or something, despite the fact they're literally in the helicopter with you far away from the battlefield. And to be honest with you, I would say that most missions on this game don't need timers anyway, but if they really must stay, then you could at least make it so all of the infantry forces you're trying to rescue aren't really reluctant to get in the helicopter with you. Oh, and did I mention the fact that every single time you lose a level on this game, you're immediately sent back to the main menu? Which is kind of annoying on its own, but what makes it infinitely worse is the fact that the old startup bug reappears, and the game crashes in an endless loading circle.
Nice.
However, despite the fact that I've just spent the last 10 minutes criticizing this game, I actually don't think it's that bad. In fact, I would say it's quite good, and it stands out in quite a lot of aspects that it is quite strong at. One example would be that the graphics look nice, and the actual textures and models of the helicopters and that in-game are very nice to look at. They've clearly had a lot of time and effort put into making them, and, you know, I appreciate that, and I do notice these things. And, you know, I can clearly see that the creators of this game are clearly very passionate with what they're doing. Not to mention the fact that from a gameplay point of view, it's just really fun to fly around as a helicopter and shoot at ground forces as you strafe at them and fire rockets and fly in low and high and evade missiles and do all this kind of stuff that really is quite fun from a arcadey sort of point of view. And that sort of concludes all the nice things I have to say about this game. Fleeting, I know, but I think now is the time to say what I felt was the most off-putting part of this game. That being that it feels so inconsistent. Like half of the developers wanted it to be a sort of fun, arcadey, easy kinda game, and the other half wanted it to be a serious, realistic, hard kind of game. And eventually they just decided to come together and form, well, this game, which is sort of an awkward combination of both. Some examples of this being that you get unlimited respawns, but you have to fly back to the battlefield from your base every single time, which is almost always quite far away. Enemies get fluorescent markers on them, but only when you get close to them. You have a health bar, but there are also components in the aircraft that, if hit, can affect your flight performance. Also, this game has a tendency of being quite hard, as even on the easiest difficulty, which was the only difficulty I actually played on, enemies will still one-shot you with unguided missiles fired from the ground. And also, by staying in areas with large amounts of forces for long periods of time, will mean that your health will be whittled away very quickly, meaning that you really can't stay in prolonged fights. However, you are still expected to beat every single enemy within a short amount of time in a certain area, and even then, that's only the primary enemies, as more often than not, there are also secondary targets that you can also go for as well, in case you haven't died enough just trying to complete the main ones. So with all that being said, I just don't really know what they want this game to be. And if they do ever intend on this game becoming big and getting a large following, then they're gonna have to choose either one or the other, as trying to do both is very, very difficult. And I would strongly recommend that you either break up the game into two different parts, so an arcadey sort of part and a simulator realistic part, or, and what is the more easy option, just make the game one or the other, and just try to appease to one audience rather than all of the audiences. Because after all, having a little bit of everything often ends up with a whole lot of nothing. So, with all that being said, I guess it's time to answer the question of, should you get Heliborne? And well, Quite simply, I say that you're gonna have to wait until the next episode.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
That's right, we're doing this in 2 parts, as this game also has a multiplayer, which is arguably the actual bigger and main part of the game, so we're gonna have to have a look at that as well before we make any final evaluations on the product. So do be sure to come back for part 2, and until then, I say I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you then.